Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Coker-Hook. If you've been following Reference Point over the last several segments, you know we've been talking about a subject very important, we believe, called really asking the question, what is 21st century democracy? There's a lot going on in our state, in our local communities, nationwide, that has impact on what our lives, our businesses, our culture is going to be like over the next 20, 30, 40 years. So we've been talking about this with people who are, creative thinkers, business people, analysts on various levels. And tonight I have three fantastic guests here with me to broach this same subject. And with me, immediately to my left, is Sally Lieber, who is former City of Mountain View City Council person and a retired State Assemblywoman for the state of California. Sally, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Very much looking forward to your comments. Bruce Preville, who's with us again. Bruce, you're becoming a fixture here on Reference Point. We've been with several shows, but I really appreciate that because you're bringing so much depth to these conversations. And so thank you for joining us again.
It's great to be here.
And then also is Matt Hammer, and Matt is the executive director of an organization called PACT, which is People Acting in Community Together. And I was introduced to Matt just the other day for the first time. So what I want to do to start this conversation today is, Matt, tell us a little bit about what PACT is, because I think of all the guests that are here today, your organization is the one that is the least known to me and to our viewing audience.
Great, thanks, Dave. PACT is a grassroots organization in Silicon Valley. We've been in the Valley for about 25, 30 years. Basically what we do is we help people through their neighborhoods and religious congregations and schools to get involved around the public issues that they deeply care about. So we help people get first define for themselves what is their priority issue, say within their congregation. We do listening campaigns, so teaching people how they can go out and listen to their friends and neighbors and other people in their congregations to define for themselves what it is that they care enough about to get involved in their own free volunteer time to try to make their community a better place. And that ends up being around issues of affordable housing, public education reform, healthcare, basically whatever it is that people want to get involved with. Which
are some of the key issues that we're struggling with here as a state and as a nation right now, these three things that you just mentioned. You also told me, Matt, that PACT is, or your group is part of a larger network of similar organizations that are, it's nationwide, is that correct?
That's right. So we are part of a national network called PICO, the PICO National Network. There are about 50 organizations like PACT all around the country, including about 18 in California, all around the Bay Area. We all have different names. In Contra Costa County, it's called Cisco, Peninsula Interfaith Action. So all these different names, but we come under this umbrella of PICO. Similar model of helping regular everyday people get involved in trying to solve the community issues that they care about.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, because I think that lays a little groundwork for what the main topic of conversation is. This whole idea of what is 21st century democracy. Are things different today than they were 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 100 years ago? And do we have challenges and problems that are unique to us that have never needed to be dealt with before, or are we revisiting things that we've kind of forgot about? And I think that the intent of these discussions that we've been having is to kind of bring some of this conversation to the forefront. We're actually going to let the folks, viewing audience, know we're actually planning on doing two segments with these guests here this time to address part of this question first in the sense of why is it that people seem so frustrated? Why is there so much confrontation going on in the political scene? And then when we get to later in this show and into the next show, we're going to talk about some things that can be done about that. And Matt, your organization is a prime example of how things can be resolved. So let's start out by talking about what's going on today and what is the nature of the challenge that we're facing. I really want to hear from you, Sally, but I'm going to go over to Bruce first and ask him to kind of state things from his perspective, because he and I have had several conversations about this.
Last fall, I was involved in the healthcare reform activities that were going on. And with 57 million Americans that don't have health coverage, with the costs of health coverage going up rapidly and more people being pushed out, whether it was because of a pre-existing condition or because they were just using the health coverage more than the insurance companies wanted them to, it became clear that this is really, there needed to be some change. And there was one day when there was change that was trying to happen in Congress, and what I heard the leaders in Congress saying was, this isn't going to be very much change. And then the next day, 700,000 people around the country called into Washington, D.C., and the following day, the leaders in Congress said, there is going to be big change. So it was an amazing success to have that many people stirred up enough to make something happen. And at the same time, it got me thinking, what is it that is so able to keep things from changing that it takes 700,000 people pushing to overcome that, at least temporarily, and make something happen that wasn't going to happen? And what I realize is that there are a lot of business interests, insurance companies in particular, who have a very big financial stake in keeping things the way that they are, because they had put together, in the complexities of our health care coverage system in this country, a way of having as huge amounts of profits, huge amounts of the benefits that they wanted, and to be able to put all the downside onto the common good. The public benefit was turning into a public detriment. And we, as a society, were paying the cost of continuing to allow the insurance companies to get filthy rich.
So what we had is a status quo situation that resulted in certain groups getting a tremendous amount of benefit, and other not getting it.
And everybody else.
And this is nothing new, actually. I mean, when you look at it, it's not just in the healthcare arena where that is.
Right.
I mean, across industries, you'll have the oil industry is another a good example of where there's tremendous benefit that goes to a few large institutions and whatever.
Right.
Sally, when we talk about this kind of a thing, your experience is unique in this panel, because you were involved in this from the inside, both here at a local level and at a state level. And this concept of having moneyed interest that are looking to promote a particular point of view is not unique to this issue that Bruce is mentioning. So what actually goes on, and is this a real sore spot when it comes to what the average person thinks?
Well, I think it is a real sore spot, and there's no one that would argue that things are going well right now. We're in the middle of a very difficult transition from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. People feel very displaced, uneasy about the future, and it's being reflected in our politics. And so I think when people see, be it the health insurance companies getting richer and richer while they and their children are getting poorer and poorer and have a less certain future, it produces a lot of anger. And I think where the elected officials have a responsibility, and their primary duty is to be the intermediaries and to carry the message from the communities that Matt was talking about into the policy arena. Now, does that break down at the city level, the state level, and the federal level? Yes, all the time. We had the experience in the healthcare debate of seeing some of the members of Congress who were literally reading statements that were written by the insurance company lobbyists on the floor of the House as their own statements. So all these things have kind of produced a feeling of who can we count on, what's really true, what's going to hold its value. And I think that now there's a huge transition to people communicating through social media.
Right.
And for me, I see that as sort of the counterpoint to the cynicism and the anger that's out there, that people really are looking for connection and communication. They're looking for the old-fashioned neighborhood where they had an intimate friendship with their neighbors, knew the people across the street. But now it's not necessarily the people across the street, it's the people on Facebook.
Right.
So we have a human tendency, I think, to try to form connections, try to make sense of things. And so I feel that there are some hopeful signs, but there's no doubt that we're going through a very, very difficult transition.
I think that term transition is an important term. I mean, I hadn't really thought of it in those terms until you had mentioned it, but before the show we were talking about another transition time back in the 1920s to 30s and 30s to 40s when we went through the Great Depression and we're trying to come up with social programs that helped to mitigate that. And there again, we were moving from that farming economy into a higher production economy. Everybody's moving into the cities from the farms and things like that. So when you're in the middle of that, as an elected official, you're actually being asked to sort of be a little schizophrenic, because you've got this thing that this environment you've grown up with and these people that you are responsible for representing, and at the same time you're kind of asked to be an advocate for change. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think one of the difficult things is that constituents, unless they're as well informed as people in the Bay Area tend to be, and people throughout California tend to be very wonkish at all socioeconomic levels, they're very interested in policy. But sometimes they don't necessarily know what's going on in Sacramento or Washington, D.C., or even at the city council level. And so people can be doing good work, but the word isn't getting out there, and that fans the flames of people being disgruntled. But the economic conditions have presented us with a very hard time. At the state level, almost half of the state's general fund money has gone away, and it's very hard to cope with it no matter which party you are.
Right. Right. So the circumstances of the day create challenges for individuals, and those challenges result in higher levels of frustration, and that frustration breeds confrontation. Okay, but underneath that are some things like, Bruce, you were talking about here in terms of the who is it that's actually putting forward the legislation that we are asking our elected officials to vote on, supposedly to the benefit of the the constituency. And there was some stuff in the paper recently in Senator Mercury News about that too, which was very interesting. Matt, how does this reflect in what you're seeing with the people that you interact with? I mean, how are the folks that just have a home down here, and the mom and dad work and they got a couple kids in school, what is it that they're not the leaders of industry or politics? What is their frustration?
Yeah, so we're working with just regular everyday people in a lot of different neighborhoods in Silicon Valley, low income, middle income, high income parts of the valley. And just what becomes really clear when you talk to people in their living rooms or over a kitchen table is that the basic structures, processes for solving basic community problems seem to be really broken right now, whether it's at a local level or certainly at a state or national level. Where there's, in a lot of neighborhoods, there's broad consensus about all kinds of different problems, that the healthcare system isn't working, or that the neighborhood high school is really mediocre. How are our kids going to be competing against kids for the same jobs from all over the world? People concerned about the care that their aging parents might be getting. All these sort of basic problems that you would have broad consensus, 60-70% of the people agreeing that that's a problem that's worth solving. And people don't know what to do about it, so that they often end up feeling frustration, but it's also just this deep apathy where people turn on the evening news or listen to the radio and feel like it's sort of the spectator sport, and it's for most people very disempowering.
So they realize that there is a challenge, that there is a problem, that these things are broken and need to be fixed. That's what I'm hearing you say. They realize that there is but they're feeling that they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I think that's the overwhelming feeling that lots and lots of people have, is that you poll Californians about how are our public schools? Are California public schools something we should be proud of? And I think my guess is 60-70% of the electorate would agree, no, we've got a major problem in public education in California. And are people hopeful that we're going to get ourselves out of this mess? And I think the same percentage of people would be probably feeling like, you know, there's really not much that I can do. So what people then do is turn to very individual approaches. I'm going to make sure that my kid gets into the best school possible, which may not be a very good school, or I'm going to do the best I can as a volunteer at my child's school. But in terms of really fixing what is broken, the structural problems, I think most people feel like there's just not a lot that average Joe or Jane can really do.
I'm going to suggest that perspective, that viewpoint of hopelessness really opens the door for the kind of thing that Bruce was talking about, of having some group, some individual, some whatever come in and say, hey, look, we can put this in and make it, maybe it helps a little bit, or maybe it just looks like it helps, but it's going to feather our nest, and so this is a very good thing. Because if people are abdicating their responsibility for governance by saying, there's nothing I can do about it, somebody's going to fill that void.
Yeah.
Well, I think just to follow up on what Matt was saying, the bright shadow, if you will, of what he was talking about, of that kind of frustration, is that people are frustrated because they want to help. They want to get involved. They want to make things better. And they don't see where the on-ramp to doing that is. And so I think, as Bruce pointed out, that's why 700,000 or 800,000 people will call in to Washington, D.C., because they see, okay, this is my chance to be a part of the process. So I think as elected officials, as community activists, our job is to present enough information about what's breaking, where can you be involved, how can you make a difference, that people find something that either they can take part in, or they can suggest to others. They can at least see that there's something going on that's relevant.
I'd like to add that another aspect of this, and that is that because of the power to influence legislation that a lot of the stakeholders have, the legislation that finally gets passed is deeply flawed with compromises that were forced in by powerful opponents to change. And the result is that the legislation is riddled with compromises that, number one, limits its effectiveness, and number two, makes it really complicated. So you get institutions that get built up around the complexities of the legislation that passes, and they're very complicated. And pretty soon they look very bureaucratic, because they are, because of the complexity of it. And then you get other institutions that are accommodating to the complexity of these institutions, and pretty soon it's really easy for people to be resigned that it's so complicated we can't even fix it. We can't even tell when the two sides say you should vote yes and the other one says you should vote no, and they look at the details and it looks like it makes sense, and then you read the other one, well, that one looks like it makes sense too.
Right.
I can't trust either of them. So people can feel very easily like there's no role for them to do anything that makes a difference, to even comprehend what's going on because of the complexities around them. It's one thing to learn about things as they come up, but it's another thing to kind of try to balance the experts on the other side who are feeding the complexity as a way of feathering their own nest, or making sure that the regular voters can't really do much to prevent them from doing what they want to do.
Well, that doesn't sound like it lends itself to a strong long-term democratic process, does it?
I think that I think that we've evolved over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years from institutions that were fairly well defined to institutions and societal systems that are full of complexity, and makes it very difficult to see how they interact and what the solutions should be and where do we go from here.
Why? Why did that happen?
Well, part of it, I think, is the result of information technology that has enabled smaller institutions, or businesses, for example, to become from nationwide to international to global. And businesses that are functioning, they have factories, or they operate in all the different aspects of the business exist all over the world, and they take this complex network and they're able to manage it using information technology and communication technology that wasn't possible before. And the result is that the business institutions or businesses themselves have been able to grow to such a size that they have the financial wherewithal that's perhaps more powerful than governments, because they're global, they're international, they have a much wider reach and a wider span. And one of the problems that we have now is businesses have decided that it's less expensive to ship jobs overseas and take advantage of workers who have now, because of the same kind of information technology, have built up their ability to be educated and to function in this global business network and take the place of jobs that previously were held by Americans. So that's one of the areas where it's showing up.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Sally, you have...
I was just going to add on to what Bruce was saying, that one of the things that we're finding now in politics is sort of the search for value and the search for what's true, the same as we've seen in the housing market and in looking for jobs, employment, improvement of neighborhoods, etc., is going on in the political realm. And I think we saw that really with the AstroTurf kinds of movements, where people from the community were coming out to members of Congress, town meetings, but they weren't necessarily coming out with their own concerns. It was in a very manufactured way. And they may have really felt the anger behind it, but it was not a pure process of just people from the community coming out on their own with their own ideas. And that's something that we're going to have to grapple with now, with a very web-based, interactive movement politically and with issues. And I don't know, for Matt, you know, how do you deal with that, and how do you really see, in the same way that we look at bills and say, is this bona fide, or was this written by a lawyer for the lobbyists? Or is it a real idea that came up from the community in a very organic way? So I think the community organizations are the counterbalance to that, which is a totally new concept of having the AstroTurf movement come out.
Is there
grassroots,
more,
right?
Is there more of that kind of situation that you just described? Is there more of that now than there may have been 10, 15, 20 years ago?
I think absolutely it's new, and it's based on the new technologies that are available, whether it's blast emailing people. I think that people identify with brands now in the same way that they used to identify with community organizations. If you go into an old cemetery, you see the insignia for the Elks Club or different fraternal organizations. Now people are identifying with Adidas or Nike in the same way, and following the corporation's voice much more. So they aren't seeing themselves as AstroTurf people, I don't think, but the corporations are really taking advantage of it, and taking advantage of the communication trends that we have out there.
And they have the wherewithal. The leveraging of these new communication technologies and the internet and whatever has come through the businesses looking to optimize their efficiencies and things. And now they're able to take that and leverage that into a political arena in a way that we didn't have available to us 20 years ago. Wow. So that's very interesting. I hadn't considered that. Bruce, you have something, looks like you have something to say there.
I agree totally with what you're saying. You know, we as ordinary people have some catching up to do, and we're doing it, you know, with things like Facebook and so forth. We have a lot of catching up to do with the ability of like business organizations that have been working with this stuff, using it for their advantage for a number of years. And from that comes their power to make things happen. We as Americans need to leverage those things, and it's happening. But we will find ourselves more and more, as we leverage the kinds of tools that are available, be able to mobilize to represent a force, a powerful enough force to counteract the forces that want to keep things the same in the face of terrible problems.
And I think ideally it would be using those techniques and tools and technologies hopefully will enable us to dig down to the truth Okay, I mean, it's if you one of the interesting things, and we've talked about this, Bruce and I have talked about this before, one of the double-edged swords of the internet technology is that there are so many websites and things out there that you can choose to get all of your information from a location that resonates with a specific issue for you, and it can be all one-sided, and you're not getting any perspective, and therefore not able to actually judge the relevance of some of the things that you're hearing. So technology has that ability, and yet we're looking at the same time to use the technology to help us to spread out and to get a little bit more broader view. And I guess the key thing is, how do we motivate people to do that? And what we want to talk about in the second segment is that side of things. I think we've laid a pretty clear picture of what causes people to get frustrated, and there are some really significant issues that we have to deal with as a culture. But I think we have the ability to do that if we are willing to step up to the challenge. And so we're going to talk about, in the next segment, we're going to talk about some of those things. I think we have just a few seconds left here in this first segment. So I want to thank you guys for joining us here. And ladies and gentlemen in the viewing audience, then stay where you are. We're going to be back for the next segment of Reference Point. We're going to dig in some more into this topic, but we're going to address it from the perspective of solutions. By the way, I want you all to remember that you can send in your questions for any of these panelists or suggestions for additional shows to info@referencepointtv.com. We'll get that question or information to the right party, and you'll get your answer. So thanks for joining us out there, and we'll see you next time on Reference Point.